What's going on, everybody? My name is Ben and welcome back to another episode of Ben Builds with Joe. We are back on the bench with our Airfix 148 scale Spitfire Mk.XIV. Today we're going to go ahead and move forward with painting, so this should be fun. Now last episode we came in, we overcoated everything with that gray Style-No-Res primer. I love that stuff. The seams look great. I'm very happy with how this has turned out so far. I think I've done all of my work, so I think we're ready to move forward with our pre-shade. And that's what we're going to be doing first. We have to paint up some parts, sure, but we need to go ahead and get our pre-shade on first because I think that's a really good step to go ahead and move forward with. So let's go ahead and jump into a time lapse. We're going to bust out some NATO Black and I'm going to pre-shade the entire aircraft and we'll see how that turns out. Let's do it. Alright everybody, we are back and as you can see our Spitfire is nicely pre-shaded. A little bit messy here and there, but for the most part it looks okay. So now let's go ahead and move over to the camo scheme. Now I mentioned the very first episode I'm going to be using these decals, Spitfires Over India, for our version. We're going to be doing our white 48 right here. So that is actually in a little different color scheme than what Joe's going to be doing for the European version. Now, these decals, I've never actually used Illiad decals before, so I don't really know how they react to microsol, microset, and all that stuff, but just from a quick glance, they look very, very nice. They tend to be in really great color. They tend to all be nicely printed, so I'm happy with those. Now, we also have a very nice bird's eye view here of different Spitfire marks. We'll be using this one right here with our chopped wings for the Mk.XIV. And I like how this looks. It gives us our camo pattern, more or less, gives us our white bands where they should go and the measurements of those bands, which is also nice. I think it's going to be really, really fun. Of course, one thing we are missing is stencils. We do have stencils here on the actual kit decals, so I'll probably be using those to go ahead and stencil up the aircraft, but we'll move over to the Illiad decals for the Spitfires Over India, and we'll do that white 48 with the dark brown and the dark green. So that should be a whole lot of fun. Now, speaking of colors, we've actually decided to go with Gunzy, or Guns, however you want to pronounce it. And we are using 3 different paints. We've got our dark earth, we've got our dark green, and from the underside of the aircraft, we have our medium sea gray. Now, I haven't done a lot of camo aircraft here on the channel. I've been doing a lot of kind of monochromatic finishes and really playing around with doing pre-shade and post-shade and all that good stuff. So I haven't done a really intricate camo pattern in a while. So this should be interesting to go ahead and try. I think the last one I did was the Lag 3. Now we're going to go ahead and use a very thin piece of tape here, and I'm going to use my X-Acto knife just like a pencil. And we're just going to trace out what would resemble, artistically speaking, one of these demarcation lines between the green and the brown. Once it is nicely cut through and I'm happy with the design, I can then take that and I can put it right down onto the model. Now, mind you, I'm actually just kind of showing you the process. We're not going to be painting anything on top first. We're actually going to start on the underside, but I just kind of want to show you the process of how I plan on approaching doing these camo patterns. Once I have it in the area that I want, I'll press it down, kind of burnish the edge down just a little bit, so that we can come in and we can overcoat the entire model with the brown color, because this will actually cover up over the dark green. So I think that's going to be a really good way to go ahead and do it. Now you can also go ahead and use something like blue tack to create that kind of snake pattern and then go ahead and mask up to that to cover the color you don't want to paint. And that should be fine, but I don't know where my blue tack is, so I've had to revert back to using tape. Not a big deal. just a little bit more time consuming. So let's go ahead and cut out another pattern, and then once we have that pattern cut out, we will then be able to stick that down right onto the wing, just like we did the first time. So not really that difficult. Like I said, a little time consuming, but I think this will give us a very nice, clean, sharp demarcation line between the dark green and that dark brown. And that's kind of what I'm going for. Even though I'm not sure if it would have been as hard edged as I'm making it here, it's going to be a safe bet to go ahead and do a little bit finer line between the two colors. So I'm happy with that. But as I mentioned, we're actually not going to be painting the top of the aircraft first. We're actually going to start on the underside. Now I'm going to go ahead and mask off the line between the wing and the rear tail, so that I can come in with that medium sea gray and I can paint up the bottom of the aircraft. Now the reason I'm going ahead and masking this, even though I really don't need to, I don't want there to be a lot of paint that's going to be covering up my pre-shade. So this is going to keep my paint confined to the bottom section of the aircraft, and I can always come back and I can make a little adjustments when I go ahead and remask to then paint the top of the aircraft. So this is again just kind of practicing masking, but also to limit the amount of paint that's going to be going all over my pre-shade in areas that, well, it shouldn't be going. So I think this will actually work really, really well. So let's go ahead and jump back into a time lapse, guys. We're going to go ahead and finish off masking everything, paint the underside of the aircraft. We're going to get the prop painted up and the nose cap painted. So let's go ahead and kick this back into high gear, push forward. All right, everybody, we have our propeller all nicely painted up, so I like how this has turned out. Again, I just used a real quick shot of yellow, and I masked off the area so that I wouldn't get yellow all over the blade. We've got our black blade and our yellow tip. I think that looks really awesome. Let's go ahead and pull off the rest of the masks, and we'll check out how it turned out. It looks pretty decent, so I'm happy with it. We'll put this aside, and we'll move on to the aircraft. Now, for the rest of the aircraft, we're going to be going ahead and painting on some dark green, and then masking off the dark green, and coming back in with some dark brown and then finishing up the aircraft with that. I'm going to try to keep the paint as thin as possible so I can make a couple of different coats. And I think that's going to be just fine to go ahead and get that nice clean demarcation line between the dark green and the dark brown. It's going to take a little bit of time to get everything masked off, but I think we've got enough tape. We can get this done for sure. So let's go ahead and grab our airbrush. We're going to go ahead and mix up a very thin coat of our dark green. We're going to come in here. We're going to paint up the area. Then we're going to mask it off. We're going to then come back in. We're going to paint the camo patterns on. We'll see how we go. So let's do it. All right, everybody, we are back, and as you can see, we have our camouflaged Spitfire Mark 14, and I'm really happy with how this has turned out so far. I kept the paint very thin, applied a few different coats over that to make sure I would have that nice pre-shade kind of showing through. It's a little stark in certain areas, but I tend to kind of go more on the stark side at first, and then I kind of work it down afterwards. Much easier to go ahead and bring it down than to have to bring it back up. So we're going to go ahead and just unmask everything, and we'll check our demarcation lines and see how it turned out. But I'm thinking it actually is probably pretty clean. Speaking of those demarcation lines, I'm not entirely certain that this is actually correct, though. That's my one issue. When the Spitfire was initially shipped over from Europe over to the Pacific Theater, over to India, a lot of times they were repainted. Now, doing some research here and trying to figure out all the camo patterns, I'm not entirely certain if I should have gone with a hard-edged or a feathered edge. Most of the references I've seen show a pretty hard-edged line between the different camo colors, so I think I'm on the right track with that, but I'm not sure if they would have had as tight of a line here with the dark earth and the dark green, as opposed to the typical Dayfighter scheme, which would have been dark ocean gray, and then of course the dark green, instead of the dark earth. So I'm not really sure if this should be a hard-edged line or a feathered line, but we have a lot more research to do, so I'm going to dive back into the books and I'm going to get some more info for you guys. In next episode, we're going to come on back and we're going to continue by painting on the white bands on the wings and on the tail surfaces. That's going to be very, very cool. But anyway, guys, we're going to go ahead and call it quits for today. We'll let everything cure. We'll be back next time for episode number 8. In the meantime, make sure to head over to Joe's channel, check out his Spitfire. He is doing a bang up job, I gotta say. Joe is pretty close to being finished. I'm going to try to crank up my speed just a little bit, but we do have a couple more episodes to go for sure. Kind of taking my time with this, as always. I do apologize for that, but we'll go ahead and see you back here on the next episode of Ben Builds with Joe. Until then, you know the drill. Go out there, get yourself some bench time, have some fun, build something cool, and we'll see you back here for the Airfix Spitfire FR Mark 14. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you soon.